Cool. Hello, fellow bassists. Welcome back to the Bass Player University. And today, not so much a lesson, but a quick discussion about reading. Something that is very polarizing, simply meaning that there's two sides and they fight often. I always wonder why. Because no matter what, at the end of the day, it's very good to be able to read. If you can read anything at lightning speed, that's an amazing skill that takes a ton of work. And there is nothing wrong with that. It doesn't actually make you a robot. It doesn't make you a slave to theory. None of that is true. Being able to read is an excellent skill. It means that you completely understand your instrument at a very thorough level. And it also means that you can pretty much play almost anything, especially with a little practice. But that's not why we're here today. I want to discuss with you something very honest from me to you. Very honestly, I think the Western notation system of music that we use to read is relatively inadequate for certain things. And I say relatively inadequate because it obviously does work quite well for most things. But when it comes to certain things, and a book like this, Music of the Whole Earth, by David Reck, it can give you a very good idea of just how far it does not go to be able to really give us just what we need when it comes to the music of the whole world. If you're writing a classical symphony, you're probably going to be using Western notation. Nothing wrong with that again. But here's the main point that I want to get across right away. When I am teaching a student to read specifically, now, first of all, there seems to be a lot of fear involved with it for most students. And that's unfortunate because at first it is fairly simple. There isn't too much to worry about. And we do the easy stuff and we have fun because we feel like we're succeeding. We feel like we're making progress. Suddenly, we throw some ties and some sixteenths into the mix. And now everything's just crazy. I'll never be able to do this. What is this? It looks like crazy hard math, for example, on paper, which is a whole nother story. So here's what I've come across after teaching for over 25 years, is that babies learn to speak before they can read or write, usually. And this is coming from someone who grew up in a household where my Greek grandparents were around very often. I'm Greek and Colombian, and I learned how to speak Greek very quickly. It wasn't my first language. It's still not perfect or anything like that. But I was suddenly able to speak Greek. And it certainly had nothing to do with reading or writing. Not at first. I approached that much later in life. So my point is, if you ooga booga back and forth with the bass, the students tend to respond quickly because we are all very, very intelligent, adaptive beings. And we are able to, once the technique is at least decent enough to alternate pluck, and I should have a bass in my hands, right? So once that is there, the ability to go back and forth for fairly simple lines is very achievable. I feel like the student gets a much more keen interest in progressing from there when that is the approach early on. Now, at the Bass Player University, we look at reading and writing all the time. And it's not just chord charts, and it's not just tablature. We look at musical notation. I went to music college. I appreciate and want students to be able to not only be able to read, but more importantly, I want them to be able to write any musical thoughts they might have or anything that they're listening to that they want to transcribe. Ask any pro. Being able to transcribe, being able to transpose as well on the fly are two things that truly give you that mastery, that feeling of mastery that you want when you try to take something like this as far as you can. But let's face it, a lot of people that come to me that didn't have their parents, you're going to play this instrument, here's your teacher. They're not kids. Maybe they're in their mid-late 20s. Maybe they're in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Maybe they're adults. Maybe they don't have enough time to become super duper excellent readers. Don't let that concept push you away from reading. You don't have to be an exceptional reader. No one's asking you to pick up a Jocko song and read it on the fly and be able to play it perfectly. Nobody's asking you that of you. I want you to be able to take a Carol Kay bass line and play it pretty much right away after seeing it for just a minute or two. I want you to be able to take simple stuff and be able to do it almost immediately. I want you to be able to take intermediate stuff and at least understand it at a core level. Be like, okay, here's a lot of stuff in the 1 chord. We're going here to the 6th chord. We go to the 4 chord. Here's the 5 chord stuff. The leading tone is there. Cool. Going back home. General analysis can help complex things suddenly become much easier to memorize. And the same goes for memorizing chords in, let's just say, a jazz chart. 2-5-1, 6-2-5-1 in another key, 4-5-1, 2-5-1, and then we go back home. Something like that, right? It's not that there's 20 different chords. It's more, okay, here is 2-5-1 in G. Now there's a 2-5-1 in E flat. Now we have a 2-5-1 in D. And that D is what brings us back home to the original one. D7 goes back to G. For example, I'm just throwing stuff out for fun. So these simple concepts help complicated things feel a lot more achievable. All complex things are a bunch of simple things combined. So anyone that was ready to be shocked and appalled at this video when I started talking about how I don't want students to read, that is not the case. What I don't want is to stuff reading down the throat of a new student or somebody who's really just looking to get in a band and start playing songs. You have to take that approach with certain people. They're not going to have the time to read, or it's inapplicable in their garage band setting. If somebody needs to learn 30 songs in 2 weeks, and they don't already read, but they're a good player, there are ways. You can find your own shorthand. Or you can half-ass the 30 songs and then come back to me and I can give you the tools, the musical currency that you need for the future, be able to memorize those 30 songs in a much better way. And perhaps even create your very own shorthand so that you can put all of the songs on one piece of paper. I've put 40 plus songs on one piece of paper because I used Roman numerals and I had a way of adjusting the keys and all this other stuff. Because let's face it, a lot of cover bands have to change keys for certain songs, especially if the singer can't do certain ranges. If one singer is very good at, let's just say, Led Zeppelin, which is pretty tough for a lot of guys to sing, maybe they're not so good at faking an Amy Winehouse song. Because if you're singing Amy Winehouse, you're probably faking it, and she's pretty tough to mimic. There's a large way to approach all of these things. There's a lot of different paths we can take. But just remember that if you're not great at reading and writing, but you have to write stuff for yourself, you need to be able to come back in 2 weeks and be able to understand what you wrote. Having musical currency and truly understanding how writing and reading and music theory works allows you to create your own shorthand if needed. It also makes sure that your lingo is the same as professionals. If you say major fifth, or, you know, diminished octave, which is actually a thing. I shouldn't say that. You know, the terminology is loose. It's not quite in line with what the pros do for their speak. There are rules. And understanding theory and music, writing, can help you better understand those rules. They're not going to make you a robot. Using a metronome can give you very good time. Just make sure you actually play to the song too, and not just the metronome. When you're reading, a metronome can actually help see where rests are. Let's say there's a rest on beat 3, and then you play the and of 3. This is called syncopation. Now there'll be a click on beat 3. You can test yourself. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. You can test yourself. When you left the rest, was that click there for you on beat 3? Then it's getting good. You can bring the speed up. Metronomes are very useful. You aren't necessarily the only responsibility as far as timekeeping. That truly is the drummer's job, but you should have as good time or better than your drummer. That's the point. Everyone should be getting better all the time. And the benefit of having lingo is that the band can express themselves more accurately when they have something to say that isn't just, I don't know, I do something like 4 of A. That's good enough for most people, but there's better, and there's better ways to transfer information like this. So my point is that there's many facets of reading. And once you take a musical thought and put it on paper, now you're just got some ink in between you and the original thought and the next person to look at it. You have to convey it as best as you can. This is what conductors are for, by the way. In case you thought conductors were useless, which they absolutely are not, and they're often some of the best trained musicians ever. There's a reason. And the reason is that the paper is not enough. It's inadequate to deliver the full message. How many times have you or someone you know received a text message and the message was not conveyed properly? It's not the best example, but this is my point. The speaker texted, the receiver of that, the reader, didn't get the proper message. And they probably read and write the language very well and can probably speak it very well. It's not about that. What's interesting is sometimes you can see a piece of music once you get really good at it, and you can say, oh, there's no way they meant that. Or that D flat seems weird. You can tell when something's not where it belongs. Same thing with just looking at a chord progression. It doesn't have to follow the circle. But there are certain boundaries that just don't make a lot of sense unless you hear that it works with the melody or whatever. There's always really cool ways to break the rules, but you have to know the rules well before you approach breaking them to the benefit of you and everyone else, of course. So just remember all this as you maybe have been avoiding reading. Maybe you only know tablature. There's always more to achieve. And that is the point of the Bass Player University. We take a completely full circle approach to everything. You call it holistic, call it whatever you want. But I make sure that you can write your own thoughts. I make sure that you can get a simple progression down on paper, quick if it's just chords, just so you have something. You can even write while you're tapping out the notes. I'll be training that too. And so much more. But most importantly, we do dictation. I play something simple or at least short. The student then tries to write it out. Even if they didn't grow up writing music their whole lives. It doesn't have to be clean and perfect. It just has to be good enough where I understand that you understood it. Being able to transcribe what you hear means you truly understand it. And how could that not be a good thing? What band wouldn't want that bass player? Thanks for hanging out, guys. Hope I didn't let you down by not holding a bass this time around. There's one right there. There's 3 right there, actually. But I just wanted to talk music about writing and all those things today. So thank you. Please do the usual. Thumbs up, share, hit the bell, subscribe, share it with everyone you've ever met, even if they don't play bass. And I hope to see you at the next class.